All right, what's up, you dirty scallywags? Rumor has it you guys want another tour of my shop and see all of the things that I've changed over the last year and a half since my last shop tour video. So let's jump inside and check out my shop. All right, so if you're new here, my name is Rob and I live on 3 acres here in Eastern Washington State. And we had our house and the shop built back in 2018. And when I moved into it, it was pretty much a stick frame building with 4 outlets and like 9 incandescent light bulbs. So as you can see, I've been pretty busy the last 6+ years outfitting this shop to how you see it today. So I did my first and only shop tour video about 1.5 years ago, and in that video I talked about a handful of things I wanted to change and some tools that I wanted to add. So I thought it'd be fun to circle back and kind of show you the progression and the things I've changed over this last 1.5 years. Okay, so we'll start here at my assembly table. This is a really cool project that I built a couple years ago. The top on this actually raises and lowers, and I was able to do that by modifying a Harbor Freight lift cart. Now in this raised position, it's roughly 42.5 inches tall, which is just nice for getting that workpiece closer to your chest, whether it's sanding or glue ups or what it might be, and just help out with fatigue. Now when it's lowered to that 34.5 inch height, I can actually use this as an in-feed table for my table saw. Now the top size is roughly 4 foot by 8 foot, and I installed this black Formica top on it, which is really nice because it's slippery, so if I'm feeding big sheets of material across my table saw, it slides across this really nice. But this also helps prevent glue from sticking up, so when you're doing glue ups, it just makes it a little bit easier to clean up when you're all done with that. Now this front half, or roughly front half of the top itself, has got the micro jig match fit dovetail clamping system. I cut this grid pattern in it, and this just allows you to use these special clamps that slide in the dovetail grooves, and you can clamp your material down to this table very securely. Now along the perimeter of the top, I've got a ton of this open cubby storage, which is great for just clearing the top off quickly and or fast tool grab or just different types of workflows. But if you're like myself and you're not very organized, this will tend to just turn into just a giant clutter catcher of a mess, which that's how mine about 99% of the time is. Okay, so along kind of the perimeter of the base, over here I've got this foot pedal system, which is how I crank the top up, and then this little brake looking lever is how I lower it down. To the right of that, I've just got an open cubby storage for my larger power tools. I got a track saw and a brad nailer, and I believe a portaband in there. So that's kind of nice just to get those commonly used tools right by this table where they're used at quite a bit. Now continuing on around the perimeter, I've got French cleat storage. So on this front's just some common hardware, screws and nuts and bolts and whatnot. And then on the other face, I've got my drill motor and my impact gun along with my orbital sander. I do have a fancy little beverage holder here in the front, which is very nice in the shop. Okay, so on these legs, I've got these casters that you can deploy and roll the bench out of the way if need be, or you can raise them up and then have it sit firmly on the ground just with its legs. A common question I get is how stable it is in this raised position. And as you can see, this thing is really, really solid. So awesome project. Got a full video on this. If you're interested, go check it out. To the left of my assembly table, I've got my joining and planing island. I've got a Grizzly G0858. It's an 8-inch joiner with a helical head. And then behind it, I've got the standard DeWalt 735 planer. Now you'll notice in between these two tools, I've got this column, and I actually have another one you'll see here in a minute. And these are not structural. They weren't built to shop. I actually installed these a couple years ago. And my idea behind them was to give me a good way to bring power to these more centrally located tools. So inside this column, it houses both the 240 volt and 120 volt power. And that just helps me prevent having extension cords draped across the ground. It also gave me a good spot to mount and route all of my 6-inch duct for my dust collection, and it gave it a clean look, I think. And then it just provides some additional larger tool storage or whatnot. I've got some levels and my track for my track saw hanging on there. All right, so last year, you'll remember I kind of referred to this area as the hallway. I've got some new maple here that I gotta get stored away and actually off the ground, but I talked about wanting to add some different tools over here and kind of fill this space out, and one of those tools was a CNC. So back in the summer, I purchased this Onefinity Elite Formane with a Masso controller, and it's got a 4 foot by 4 foot cut capacity. And this has been a fun new tool to learn. Kind of a steep learning curve, but I've enjoyed learning it, and I've actually cranked quite a few projects out on this machine. Now the table isn't 100% complete. It's got similar casters as my assembly table, where I can actually use this little ratchet system to drive these feet down and make it stationary, or I can lift them up and have it roll around. I still need to finish up my dust collection and get it routed over here and get a dust boot for the router itself. As you know, these CNCs, they create a ton of dust and make a mess. Currently, I'm just using this old Shop Fox 1 horsepower dust collector, and I just follow the tool head around and try to gather as much dust and wood chips as I can. So down below, I want to partition partition it out for storage and be able to, you know, add on some other equipment that kind of goes with the CNC, but haven't really got to that yet. I do have some remaining 2 sheets of Baltic birch plywood that I'm storing down here. It's kind of an awkward material to store, being that it's 5 foot by 5 foot. Okay, so one new tool. Let's keep this going. Okay, so kind of cruising past the CNC to a pretty cool feature of my shop. So when I had the shop built, I actually had it plumbed for a bathroom. So obviously got a toilet, nice deep sink for cleaning paint gear or whatever out. I do have a heater in here along with a tankless hot water heater, so got warm water. This was really handy for when I first built my shop and before it was insulated or heated. It was a good area to let my glue ups dry while the winter was here in the cold months. All right, so another big change I made this year was, if you recall in my last video, I was storing all of my sheet goods vertically against this exterior wall of my bathroom. And I talked about wanting to clean that up. And the other thing was I wanted to get my 3D printer out of this kind of main cavity of my shop and get it protected from all the dust that a wood shop naturally has. So this is what I came up with. It's a plywood storage / 3D print enclosure. So this allows me to store all of my sheet goods horizontally down below, keep them a little bit more organized, and then also preventing that bowing issue I was getting by storing them vertically. Now up above it is kind of the main showpiece of it, if you will. It's my 3D print enclosure. Currently just houses my only 3D printer, but I do have plans on getting about 3 more that I can fit in here, and along with some other additional accessories. This does exactly as I said. It keeps my 3D printer out of this dusty wood shop. And what I ended up doing was put a massive power strip in here. It's got climate control, filtration, a dehumidifier. Most, if not all of the things in here are either automated or are Wi-Fi controlled, so I can just do it via my phone or computer inside my house. I installed these sliding glass doors. There's 4 of them. So I've got really good access to the inside of this enclosure, which makes it easy for doing maintenance or retrieving prints. One thing I did do, and it was more of just a creative experiment to have fun, was I've always wanted my own rolling library ladder, and I decided to make my own, including all the hardware and the track system. And although it turned out great, it's not super practical for getting in and out of this, and it turned into be like a rolling death trap. This thing's pretty sketchy to use. So I've kind of abandoned it, and I'm just gonna take it to the dump, I think. What I found to work the best was just this little 3-foot step ladder. This is plenty high for me to be able to get inside and either do maintenance on my printer or retrieve prints or whatnot. So I just use the ladder now. All right, so in this back, most westward wall of my shop, it's turning into quite the boneyard with all of my offcuts and my scrap bins overflowing, and I got 2x4s laying here on the ground. This is where my miter station lives. I built this back in 2018, back before I had anything in the shop. This gave me a ton of storage, and then of course a place to house my old beat up rigid 12-inch non-sliding miter saw. If you don't recognize this design, it's actually Jay Bates's design. And this was a great kind of first shop furniture build in my shop to provide a ton of storage. All of these drawers just have their own items in it, whether it's hand tools that I don't use that frequently, or clamps or paint gear, just miscellaneous stuff. Up above is just all my quick grab consumables, garbage bags, glues, epoxies, and whatnot. Then at the very top is just some more lumber storage. I've got a ton of these oak slabs that I got for free, along with some walnut offcuts, just waiting to be used up on a project. Up above is my Big Max natural gas heater. I always forget if it's 100,000 or 120,000 BTU unit, but it does a fantastic job at heating my entire shop during the winter months. I coupled it with a Ecobee wireless thermostat, and that just makes it even more convenient to turn it on before I even have to come out here and wait for it to warm up. I can just do all that from inside my house. Okay, and then spinning around to kind of like the more central back of my shop, I've got my table saw island. So again, I've got another column back here, just like at my joining and planing island. Again, it just houses all of my 240 volt and 120 volt power, and then also gave me a good spot to continue my 6-inch duct for my dust collection down. As far as the table saw, I've still got my Grizzly 1023 RL. Had this the better part of 4 years. I think it was one of the first larger tools I bought for the shop, and it's fantastic. 0 complaints, plenty of power. The fence on it's nice and straight. So if you're in the market for something that's not a saw stop, I would look at this guy. Now, one thing I wanted to address in this area in last year's video is coming up with my own overarm dust hood. So over the summer, that's exactly what I did. I built this overarm dust hood, and it's nice because it spins out of the way when not being used, but then you can lower it back down into position and use it for the cuts that are applicable. Now, the actual hood on it is fully adjustable for different thickness materials. And this thing has kicked butt ever since I installed it. I've got a full video, build video on this, and tons of short form content. But this thing, it's just great. It's allowed me to do a true 4-inch, dual 4-inch hookup to my saw. So I've still got the 4-inch going down to the cabinet. And then of course this 4-inch going overarm to capture dust at the blade. Now I've got a full 3D print file package for sale over on my Etsy store. So if you've got a 3D printer and you want to kind of replicate the same overarm in your shop at home, go check those out. This has been a fantastic addition to my table saw. And I think overarm dust collection in general is just a very undervalued accessory for any table saw. Behind it is just my outfeed table. It's nothing fancy. It's a square table with 4 legs. And again, to the side of it is my router table that I built several years ago at my last shop setup, and still going strong. It looks ugly, but it does serve a purpose and it works pretty good. I use it all the time. But with that being said, one of my new projects going forward, probably next year, is gonna re-outfit this whole entire back table saw area. Of course, I'm gonna keep my table saw and the overarm, but I wanna build a table that's pretty much this whole area that's kind of built around my table saw, and then build a new router table portion of it. Get a nicer router, nicer insert plate, incorporate my actual shop dust collection into it, and just kind of outfit this back area to have some pretty trick features and things that I have found to be useful in the table saw kind of realm. One thing I always forget to talk about is up above my table saw is my DIY air filtration system for my shop. I built it out of a repurposed furnace blower motor. It was a 240 volt with 3 speeds. I've got it just wired up on the low speed to a switch over on that north wall. And this thing, it does great at just pulling all that dust out of my shop when I've got like heavy cut down processes going or doing a ton of sanding. It's also great for just circulating the warm air during the winter months when I'm heating my shop. Likewise in the summer, I don't have AC or anything, but just continuing that air movement through the shop kind of helps keep it somewhat comfortable in here. Okay, then just passing by the table saw and going to the north wall, I've got my Grizzly G0513X2. It's a 17-inch bandsaw, I believe 2 horsepower, and currently I've got the Timberwolf 3/4-inch resaw blade. I actually wish I had 2 of them, one for doing dedicated curves and then one setup just like this with a resaw blade in it. That's only kind of downside to a bandsaw is just doing the blade swap outs. I still need to finish up my dust collection to it. I know I talked about that in the last video, and I feel now that I'm kind of going through and checking the boxes and cleaning up some loose ends, this is going to be kind of on priority to come up with a dual hookup here. To the right of my bandsaw on this north wall is what I intended it to be, was a sanding station slash sharpening station. So what I did was just built these 2 workbenches around my rigid oscillating belt spindle sander. And then of course I put it on this rollout drawer, which just allowed me to be able to still use this tilt bed function of it. I found with it tucked in this little cubby here, if I needed to, sand on an angle or with anything of large size on that angle, these 2 sides would interfere with that. So I found having it on that rollout drawer that actually locks into position allowed me to still use that function. Now both the surfaces are completely flush with the bed of the sander, so it's nice for when I got larger pieces that I'm sanding, I can slide them back and forth. And of course I did the same black laminate top over here as I did on my assembly table, and that nice slick surface just makes it easy for sanding the larger pieces. Again, it's got tons of storage. I got shelving, a couple of these nice little friction fit pull-out drawers with consumables, and then of course, just some standard, regular, conventional drawers with clamps and glues and just consumables really. And then I also continued that open cubby storage along the upper top, which is just nice for quick tool grabs or clearing the surface off. All right, so just in front of this sanding station and next to my assembly table is the newest tool in my shop. I got this a couple weeks ago. It's the Supermax 1938 drum sander. I literally just rolled it into place here yesterday and got the dust collection all hooked up on it. And I've only used it a couple times so far, but I'm really excited to put this thing to use. Now, this was a very hard tool for me to justify the cost on. I've had my eye on it for a few years and I've used a couple of them, but it is kind of a one-trick pony, so it was hard for me to really pull the trigger on it. But I had a couple things happen that kind of helped me make the decision on it. And the first one was here a few weeks ago, I was actually planing some thin maple that I just got done resawing. And as soon as I fed this into my planer, once it hit the blades, it exploded and sent it back out, smashing into my hands. Didn't cause any injuries, but it hurt really bad. And I said, all right, that's strike 1. Now, the second thing isn't really something that happened, but just due to the nature of me kind of expanding my shop and adding a CNC, it kind of opened up the doors as far as being able to flatten or surface larger materials. So it only made sense to have a sander that would allow me to sand larger surfaces as well. So being like a tabletop or whatnot. And this guy will allow me to sand up to 38 inches with 2 passes. So it just kind of felt right with those 2 things kind of in place to finally pull the trigger on it. Like I'd mentioned, I got dust collection hooked up to it. If you've seen my dust collection video on the install, using this much flex hose is not my typical forte. I tend to hard pipe as close as I can to the tool, and then just use just a small amount of flex hose. But I was really eager to get this set up, and I tried to get it going with just things that I had on hand in my shop. So I had a scrap piece, a 6-inch pipe. I had a 45, I did have to buy a Y, but then I actually used a bell end off a short chunk of pipe as a coupling. And then I 3D printed my own 6-inch to 4-inch reducer. And then of course I had a old 4-inch blast gate, and this really got me going. That being said, with this flex hose, if you've got kind of a smaller unit or underpowered unit for your shop, this flex hose causes a ton of turbulence and it'll drastically reduce the flow of your system, so I don't suggest it. But for me, I've actually got a fairly large system in my shop. This particular tool recommends having at least 600 CFM to it, and after doing tests on it, I was able to get about 700 CFM. It might have been even a little bit more. So having a larger system in your shop kind of allows you to cheat a little bit with how you make your dust collection hookups. Okay, so being that we're talking about dust collection, the next thing is my dust collection system in my shop. I've got the Clearview 1450. I don't believe they sell this model anymore. I think it's been replaced with a newer model, but this thing has been fantastic. I've got 6-inch duct to all of my tools in my shop, where it either hooks up at 6-inch to the tool or it Ys off to a dual 4-inch. And then a couple locations I've got just a single 4-inch, which is fine. I try not to do anything less than 4-inch in my shop, just because these larger systems, anything less than that, and it drastically reduces the flow. So it's kind of a toss up. Even at my miter station, I've got a 2-inch hose to it, and it works, but I have to have multiple gates open just not to starve this unit. Even on these single 4-inch units, I have 2 of these at minimum, or not minimum, but I have 2 of them open. So that way I'm getting the maximum efficiency with my unit. If it was just the one 4-inch, it'll work, but you can tell that it really starves it and you don't get the best dust collection from it. So these larger units, it's always important to run all your calculations to make sure you're getting the full power of it. But great unit, I like the wireless remote. I've got a complete build video or install video of this entire system, and getting all the 6-inch pipe and some tips and tricks on how I did it. So this is in the, I guess, very frontmost part of my shop in front of my main roll-up door. I've got my Rubo inspired hand tool bench. So this is a fun project. It's got all friction fit mortise and tenon joinery. It is still not finished. I've talked about this multiple times in videos. I need to go through and resurface the top and add my dog holes, and of course add some actual woodworking vices. And over the years, once all the wood's kind of settled and shrunk up, this centerpiece here is actually removable, or it doubles as a plane stop or a tool holder. But as you can see over the years, it's not nice and wiggly in there. So I actually need to make a new one now that everything's kind of settled out, and get one that fits nice and solid in there. But yeah, great bench, super solid. So it's good for all your chisel and hand planing work. You can really beat it up and it doesn't care. Down below, it's just some more miscellaneous storage. I've got some longer pipe clamps, and of course my steam box for my steam bending projects, which is something that I want to get back into. I've made a couple projects, and I've got some ideas for some more. All right, so that's it for my 2024 shop tour. As you can see, this last year and a half from the time I made my last shop tour video, I've changed up a ton of workflow. I've added some new tools, checked off some loose ends, but I still have plenty of things to do in here and tons of cool projects for next year. Now, if you're new here, I'll link all of the project videos that I kind of highlighted in this video down in my description below. So if you're interested, you can check them out there. And with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.